Welcome to Cool Air's Sioux Falls Flight School Ground School. My name is Clay Anderson. I'm the owner of the Sioux Falls Flight School. The reason why you're here and I'm here is that we're going to learn how to fly. We're going to become a pilot. This is a issue of Gleim magazine that basically talks about some of the fundamentals, and we're going to discuss some of those today. We're going to discuss what the requirements are to become a pilot. We're going to discuss what it costs to become a pilot. We're going to discuss all the attitudes and maneuvers that you're going to require to become a private pilot, along with what's in store for you on your flight. Learning to fly is actually quite easy. We've broken it down to 6 basic steps for you to achieve your private pilot certificate. My recommendation is that you go out and you take your first flight lesson, maybe 2 of them. This way you'll get to understand what I call the gut effect. Can your gut take the turns? Can you take the up and down motion in an aircraft? You know, for most people, this is a great eye opener. And when you're in the front seat of the controls, it's very different than being in the back seat, especially of a commercial jet where you have no control and you don't really know the direction the aircraft is going outside of what you can see through a window. So I highly recommend, before you make any commitments to any flight school about flight training, take a lesson or 2. See if you feel like it's going to be a good fit. And once you do, then it's next to purchase some of your study materials. This would basically be called ground school material. And depending on the type of flight school you have that you're going to go to, for our purposes, this syllabus information is a Part 141 syllabus that you're going to follow. Next, find a good instructor and make sure it's somebody that you can kind of identify with, you feel comfortable with, because you're going to be spending the next 30 hours minimum for your private pilot's license. So a good instructor is vital. As you progress, you're ultimately going to need a medical certificate that is offered and furnished by an FAA physician. This document will act as your student pilot certificate after you solo and up until the day you become a private pilot. Knowing like a student pilot certificate would be much like a learner's permit. It's going to allow you to fly an aircraft all by yourself. However, you can't take passengers. So much like a learner's permit and a full driver's license, once you achieve that, then you're able to take other individuals in the air. Along your route of flying, you're going to be preparing to pass the FAA knowledge test. This private pilot knowledge test is going to consist of over 700 questions, of which you need to be able to have a random 70 answered with at least 70% or better. Once you achieve that and you achieve all your flying goals and your minimum requirements for your syllabus, then you're going to ask and have a FAA inspector come out and give you the practical and flight test. This practical test is quite daunting. It's going to be an oral exam at your flight school with the FAA inspector. He's going to basically determine if you are qualified knowledge-wise. Then he's going to ask you to go out and do a flight test. These will be all the maneuvers that you've already gone over with your flight instructor through the previous period of time, getting up to this point. Upon satisfactory completion, at least to his standards, hey, you're a private pilot, so let's get going. Before you can solo, I mentioned this is an example of your medical certificate. When you go to your FAA approved examiner, this medical certificate is going to give you, and give anybody else that would ask you to see this, your current information. There are certain requirements in order to receive this outside of good medical condition. So ask your individual flight school prior to going to this route if you know of any other medical history that you may have questions with. This basically is a little more stringent than your traditional football exam, if you will. So there are certain things that you can and cannot do. Like I mentioned before, upon your solo, where you're able to take control of the aircraft without your flight instructor, that flight instructor will have to turn this certificate over, endorse the back saying that you are eligible and you are worthy of piloting an aircraft by yourself. And upon that, it's time to solo. Once you solo and go through all the other requirements, ultimately you're going to be going for what is called a pilot certificate or pilot's license. This license is a green plastic license, and in the next year or so may have a picture of yourself on there. But it's going to basically give you, pretty much like a driver's license does, all the information about where you live, your current weight, and what sort of ratings you have. And if you notice on this on the bottom right there, the private pilot certificate is the only thing that's on there. And on the back you'll have other add-ons, if you will, to that certificate. So let's talk about it. What does it take to earn your private pilot certificate? Well, first of all, you have to be 17 years of age to get one. You only have to be 16 as solo, so it's a little bit like that learner's permit deal. They want to see you walk before you fly. Solo at 16 is still a big deal, and it's not for everybody. You're not required to be 16 in order to start your lessons. However, you can amass quite a bit of time along the route, and as you progress physically and mentally for the knowledge side, you're going to be a very accomplished pilot as time goes on. Secondly, you're going to have to be able to speak, read, and write fluent English. English is the international language of aviation. So whether you're in China or South America or Canada or the United States, English is the aviation language of preference. Third, to become a private pilot, you have at least a minimum third-class medical certificate. This is generally most of the general aviation community, of which allows you all the privileges of flying as a private pilot. The second class certificate, that is not noted here, but the second class is for higher advanced aviation degrees, and it may include individuals that are flying cargo or other passengers for a living. Whereas the first class medical certificate, that is eligible and allowed for air traffic ATPs, air transportation pilots, and these would be much like what you would have flying your civil aviation's airlines. One thought too is that the first class medical certificate is only valid for 6 months. Then it has to be renewed. If it's not timely renewed on time, it automatically reverts to a second class medical certificate. Medical class certificates are good for 1 year for second class, and third year they're good for up to 3 years. However, if you are under 40 years old, that has just been extended out to 5 years. So if you're under 40, your third class medical will be good for 5 years. Fourth, you have to pass the FAA knowledge test with 70% or better. That's kind of a C grade, like the way we like to see it. That's going to consist of about 60 questions from over 700 in the FAA test bank. One thing to remember, however, is the closer you get to 70% is this knowledge of the parts that you miss, the incorrect answers, will be available to the FAA inspector, that ultimately you're going to have to prove your worthiness to him. He's going to know exactly which questions you missed. So be prepared. I also mentioned flight school requirements. There are 2 primary flight school authorized to the FAA, and one is a Part 61 flight school, which has a minimum of 40 hours of flight time. So 10 hours would be solo, and a minimum of 30 with a dual instructor would be available. It is very flexible, so if you are working or you've got other time commitments that don't allow you to have specific rule of all your time, this may be the best option for you. There is a Part 141 flight school when their minimum requirements are slightly less. It shows that they have a minimum of 35 hours of flight time and 35 hours of ground school. That 35 hours of ground school is generally based on either classroom activity or a syllabus that takes you through a series of education. So coupling those two together and puts you on a little bit more rigid schedule, a little bit tighter flight schedule, that'll allow you a Part 141 school. On the private pilot, I wouldn't recommend you can go either way. However, if your interest is to be more of an avocation, if flying was your desire to be as a career, when your instrument and commercial ratings start to getting into your vantage point, you're going to probably want to consider a Part 141 school based on the cost savings by being able to do that. Now, I just mentioned the knowledge and practical tests as an example of one of the tests that you're going to be required. That's not going to be through your flight school. It's going to be through an FAA approved center. And I said before, it's a 70% or better pass rate. Closest to Sioux Falls would be maybe Brookings at the SDSU campus, and also down in Sioux City at the airport there. Next, I mentioned that the flight maneuvers and practical tests will be administered for a fee by an FAA designated pilot examiner. Now, these guys and gals are experienced flight instructors and pilots, and they've been authorized through the FAA to conduct these practical tests. So they may not actually work for the FAA, but they do to some degree, much like the physicians that are your medical examiners. They're probably practical, regular physicians in your community. However, they've gone through the extended educational process and requirements that the FAA has, and they have put a set of lenses onto their personal practitioner eyes, if you will, to look through that, look upon that young pilot with the eyes and the with the interest of the FAA paramount. Some of the flight maneuvers I'll just briefly go over real quick. The flight maneuvers in flight training, you'll have your climb, which is when you take off from a landing strip or from a runway. You will climb, you'll make your turns. Turns will be probably to a constant heading. You'll be able to have to maintain a constant altitude at the same altitude off the ground, and then ultimately you're going to have to make a descent onto another runway. Let's talk about this briefly. Climbs. You've got a yoke in front of you, which would be like a steering wheel in an airplane. You're pulling back the yoke and adjusting the full throttle as you're climbing out off the runway. To level off from that climb, you're going to push this nose down, just to maintain that altitude, and by pushing that yoke forward. And once you have upon your desired speed, you may want to just reduce this throttle a little bit, since it's been pushed in all the way, or full throttle upon takeoff. Next that you're going to be working with is a turn. Using the yoke in your hands, and they operate the ailerons, which are on each of the main wings, rear and not the leading edge, but the back of the wing, that will go up and down in opposite coordination, so that you can actually make a banked turn. Turning slowly, perhaps 10 to 20 degrees bank angle when you make your turn, and once your ailerons reach that desired degree, then you can go ahead and pull off the pressure there. You're going to reduce the yoke to maintain that bank, and then you may add a little bit of your pedals. Your pedals on your feet are also coordinated to work with your rear rudder. And when you look at your screen in front of you, that's going to be called the brick. You're going to want to stand on the brick, and it's just a square rectangle that you want to be able to align with your indicator there. And throughout your flight, you'll maybe want to glance at your turn coordinator throughout your flight, just to make sure it's coordinated flight, and it feels good for all your other passengers.